So it's, I don't know, late on Monday night. I'm trying to get this done for you, so you got to give me a little bit of a break here. What we're talking about this time is activities in the GI tract, so what actually happens and where it happens. First, you need to look at the physiology of digestion in general, and this was on today's test. So you already know this, but I just want to review it again. We start with ingestion, which was putting food in your mouth, and then you go to propulsion, which is pushing the food down. All right, that happens by peristalsis. It also happens by mixing or segmentation, which is the different ways that the peristalsis works in particular organs. We don't really need to get into that much detail. All right, and then you have the mechanical breakdown, which occurs with the churning or like the grinding of your teeth. Then you have actual digestion, which is usually talk about chemical digestion. Then you have absorption, where we take the nutrients and we take them into our body, into the bloodstream. We go from like that center hole, and we talked about like this part not being in your body, but like out here being your body, and you need to go from that hole into your body. So that's absorption, and then defecation, where you get rid of the waste. Next, we have activities that occur in the mouth, pharynx, and the esophagus. So first, let's start with ingestion when food is placed in the mouth. Additionally, we have our mechanical digestion. So this would be mastication or chewing. So when you chew your food, you're just going to crush it and make a larger surface area so that the chemical digestion can occur. All right, so second thing that happens in the mouth is chemical digestion. For chemical digestion, we're talking about salivary amylase, which you should know from test yesterday. Salivary amylase actually breaks down carbohydrates. There's Lainey. As far as absorption goes, nothing is absorbed in the mouth, all right? So we don't have to worry about that. We just have our carbohydrate digestion occurring there. So next we have deglutition. So deglutition is the fancy word for swallowing. It happens in two stages. You have the first, which is the voluntary stage. This is when you're like chewing food and you're like, all right, I'm ready to swallow. That's the voluntary stage, or the buccal stage. It has to do with your mouth. What happens is you take your food and you form a bolus. Now, think of when you chew your food and you go to someone and they see the food on your tongue, right? It's like shaped kind of in this like curved area like this. It's like the shape of, the shape of the roof of your mouth. Think of if you put like a whole bunch of bread. If you chewed bread, then pushed it into the roof of your mouth, you have like that curved area like that. That's what a bolus is when your food is chewed enough and mushy enough that you can shape it into that shape on the roof of the mouth. So you form a bolus, then the bolus is forced into the pharynx by the tongue. So think of when you swallow, you push your tongue to the roof of your mouth. When you do that, the soft palate, the soft squishy part in the back of your mouth is going to raise. The uvula goes backwards and closes off the nasal passage. Then the epiglottis flips and covers the trachea. All right, you cause that to happen by being, all right, I'm going to swallow my food. Then you jump to, once you do that swallow that you're thinking of, you then jump into the involuntary stage. All right, this is called the pharyngeal esophageal phase because it has to do with, it's once you get the food past the pharynx and into the esophagus. All right, so what happens is the bolus is going to move past the pharynx, and at this point, you're not breathing. All right, your nasal passage and your respiratory, all of it's all closed off because the uvula is covering the nose and the epiglottis is covering the trachea. So the bolus is going to push past the upper esophageal sphincter and enter the esophagus. All right, so no breathing is happening here. Once you get past that upper esophageal sphincter and you're in the esophagus, then you can breathe again and everything goes back to normal. And peristalsis, which is those wave-like contractions that are like this, kind of like the toothpaste, like you're pushing toothpaste down. Peristalsis is going to move the bolus down towards your stomach. Once the peristalsis reaches that lower esophageal sphincter right before the stomach, it's going to cause it to open and the food's going to empty into the stomach. All right, so now that we have the food go from the esophagus into the stomach, we need to talk about digestion that occurs in the stomach, or the activities that occur in the stomach. So because we just did peristalsis into the stomach, I want to mention food propulsion and mechanical digestion, because the mechanical digestion that occurs in the stomach happens because of the propulsion of food, right? So the propulsion of food is actually caused by three different things. So first we have peristalsis, which is that wave that pushed the food down to the stomach, right? And then when peristalsis continues within the stomach, it actually causes your stomach to churn and mix the food. It's like it mixes it all up. Then you have grinding, which occurs, and that's in the pyloric region. So it's going to grind all the food together, and it's going to let it go in small increments out the sphincter right there, the lower, no, not lower esophageal sphincter, the pyloric sphincter, thanks. It's going to go out that pyloric sphincter right there into the small intestine, but it's going to go in really small increments. And then retropulsion is actually a peristaltic wave that's going to close that pyloric sphincter and force the food to kind of like spin backwards back in the stomach and continue moving around because the grinding only lets a small amount out at once. All right, so that's going to cause the food to continue moving around the stomach, and then the stomach will empty then in 4 to 6 hours. But that's all your mechanical digestion in your stomach. You also have chemical digestion. So chemical digestion in your stomach is going to happen because you're going to release some hormones. All right, so when you smell food, or actually the presence of food in your stomach, sorry, causes the hormone gastrin to be released. So that's going to be your first one. And gastrin is going to trigger like this waterfall effect for all the other hormones. So gastrin will be released. Gastrin then causes your stomach glands to release pepsinogen, mucus, and hydrochloric acid. The hydrochloric acid, because it's a very strong acid, lowers the pH of your stomach. When it lowers the pH of the stomach, that causes pepsinogen to change into pepsin, and then pepsin can start breaking down your proteins. All right, so do we have that? So food in your stomach causes gastrin to be released. Gastrin triggers pepsinogen, mucus, and HCl. HCl causes that pepsinogen that was just released to turn into pepsin. Pepsin then breaks down proteins. Okay, and then in your stomach, once your proteins are starting to break down, they're going to continue breaking down as we move down the tract. The only thing that's going to be absorbed in your stomach would be alcohol and aspirin. Still not much. All right, next we have our protein digestion, and we just talked about this. The protein digestion enzymes, we did pepsin already. We said that that's going to is going to digest our proteins that are in our stomach. The only one we didn't mention is renin. So renin's a little bit different. Renin is only found in infants, all right? And renin actually causes milk to like kind of spoil, like to coagulate, to kind of get thicker. And it's only found in infants because infants live on milk, right? So think of like a baby when they spit up, you know, that like curdly, like curdles, that curdly milky grossness. The curdles are because they have renin, and the renin works in the milk and it causes it to curdle. Now adults, when they throw up milk, it's not like curdled like that because adults don't have renin anymore. Because when the milk curdles, it stays in your stomach a little longer, so it allows you to break it down a little further. And since that's all infants eat, you want them to break down as much as possible, not just kind of like slide through and not get nutrients from it. Make sense? So pepsin is the protein digestion enzyme in adults, and then infants also have renin because they live off of milk and they need to keep that milk in there so they can break it down as much as possible. Next, we have digestion in the small intestines. So now we're going to push the food from stomach into the small intestine. So chyme, the food is now called chyme. So we went from a bolus, we went from food to a bolus, and in the stomach we turned it into chyme because we added all the fluids into it. So chyme now enters the small intestine, and when it enters, it causes secretin and CCK to be released. Secretin and CCK make the liver and gallbladder release bile and make the pancreas release pancreatic juices. Inside your intestines, in addition, you have your brush border cells, which are going to produce intestinal enzymes. They're going to break your sugars, double sugars into simple sugars, and they're going to keep digesting your proteins. This is going to be like the last step for digestion, so all of your proteins are going to end up being digested here. And then your pancreatic enzymes, which were triggered by that CCK and secretin, they're going to enter from the hepatopancreatic ampulla, and they're going to digest carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. So at this point in that duodenum of the small intestine, we're breaking down everything all at once. And that's like the end of all the chemical digestion is what's occurring here in the small intestine. Okay, I'm back. I had to stop and eat some macaroni and cheese because it is now 9:30 because we had softball last night. And I mean tonight, but we won. Or not we. Well, me, because I pitched. But the girls won. So back to track. We are on to absorption in the small intestine. So we broke everything down. We had all of our enzymes added, all of our pancreatic enzymes and bile and all that kind of stuff. So now we need to absorb it all. So in the small intestine, we have all these villi. Remember we had these guys that looked like this little like this thing, right? So we have all these villi in the small intestine, and they're going to absorb all the water for the whole length of the small intestine, and they also absorb all our end products of digestion. So they're going to absorb our carbohydrates, which are now monosaccharides, our proteins, which are now amino acids, our nucleic acids, which are now nucleotides, and our fatty acids, or our lipids, which are now fatty acids. So everything is going to absorb by active transport, at least most things, except for lipids. Lipids are going to actually diffuse into this this center guy right here, this thing. This thing in the middle is called the lacteal, and lipids are going to go right into that lacteal, and they go into the lymph system. But the rest of the stuff is going to actually absorb into the capillary that's in the middle, that blue and red area, which is a capillary, is where everything else, all your other nutrients are going to get absorbed into, and then they're going to like go to the liver to be filtered and all that kind of stuff. After we're done with all that absorption, we then slowly move to our large intestine. Now, in our large intestine, we have no digestive enzymes being produced, so we don't have any chemical digestion. We have no mechanical digestion either. All we have is some bacteria that are going to remove the remaining nutrients, right? But the bacteria are going to produce vitamin B and K, and they're going to release gas, right? That's why people pass gas, because of those bacteria. The other thing that's going to happen in our small intestines, our water is going to be absorbed, and our vitamin B and K are going to be absorbed. The remaining materials, which is all of our undigestible material, is going to be eliminated in your feces, right? Feces is going to contain undigested food, mucus, bacteria, and water. Lastly, for our propulsion and defecation, what's going to happen is that you have sluggish peristalsis waves, so slow. They're slow, but they're fairly intense peristaltic waves that are going to push the residue or the feces through your large intestine, right? And then you have these haustral contractions. Remember the haustras were those little bands of muscles? They were like rings like this down the muscle. Think of the pig and what it looked like. So you have haustral contractions where those are going to crunch, and those produce mass movements, which are slow, powerful movements that occur 3 to 4 times per day. They usually occur about a half hour after eating, because it's the end of that peristaltic wave that occurs. And then the presence of feces, so they're going to push all the feces throughout like the whole large intestine. Think about it. They're going to go ascending up, transverse over, descending down, then over to the sigmoid colon, and then over to the rectum. So the presence of feces in the rectum is going to cause the defecation reflex. And the defecation reflex is when the internal anal sphincter is going to relax, and defecation occurs when you voluntarily relax the external anal sphincter. You have control over that one. And if you don't relax the external anal sphincter, then the defecation reflex pauses and stops and goes away until about a half hour after you eat again. Then you have to go again. So that's all of it. Mouth to anus digestion. If you have questions, email me and ask. Thanks, guys.